On the morning of June 5, 1967, hundreds of modified Sherman tanks rolled toward battle across 3 different fronts. Their crews knew they were operating machines that should have been scrapped 2 decades earlier. The hulls had been manufactured in Detroit and Philadelphia during World War II. The guns had been designed in France for tanks that did not yet exist when these Shermans first saw combat. The engines had been replaced, the suspensions upgraded, the turrets modified beyond anything American engineers had ever imagined. These tanks were 23 years old. Some had crossed the Rhine with Patton's Third Army. Others had fought through Italy or the Pacific. Many had been purchased from European scrapyards for a few hundred each, smuggled through ports in crates marked as agricultural equipment, and rebuilt multiple times in workshops scattered across Israel. Their opponents that morning were operating Soviet T-54 and T-55 tanks, modern machines with sloped armor, powerful 100mm guns, infrared night vision equipment, and ammunition stabilization systems. On paper, the engagement should have been a massacre. The Sherman was a relic from a war that ended before most of these Arab tankers were born. The T-55 was the backbone of Soviet armored doctrine, exported to allies across 3 continents. Arab tankers had trained for months specifically to fight this battle. Soviet advisors had taught them hull-down positions, coordinated fire, and tactical movement. They outnumbered Israeli forces and held prepared defensive positions. What happened over the next 6 days would prove that the outcome of armored warfare depends on far more than specifications written on a page. The M4 Sherman was never supposed to survive beyond 1945. American war planners designed it as a mass production weapon, a tank that could be manufactured by the thousands in automobile factories across the Midwest. The design philosophy prioritized simplicity over sophistication, reliability over raw performance, and production numbers over individual capability. 11 different factories produced Shermans during the war. The Detroit Tank Arsenal, built specifically for tank production and managed by Chrysler, manufactured nearly 18,000 vehicles alone. Limmer Locomotive Works, Press Steel Car Company, Baldwin Locomotive, Fisher Tank Arsenal and others contributed to a production total that reached 49,324 units between 1942 and 1945. The Sherman had problems. Every crew who operated one knew these problems intimately. The armor was thin compared to German Tigers and Panthers, maxing out at 76mm on frontal surfaces that could be penetrated by standard German 75mm tank guns at combat ranges. The original 75mm M3 gun struggled against heavy German armor. Crews had to close to dangerously short distances or rely on flanking shots to defeat Panthers and Tigers. The gasoline-powered versions had an unfortunate tendency to catch fire when penetrated. Ammunition storage in early models lacked adequate protection. When a round penetrated the hull, the resulting fire often consumed the vehicle before the crew could escape. American tankers called them Ronsons, after the cigarette lighter whose advertising slogan promised it lit every time. British crews called them brewing up. German soldiers called them Tommy cookers. But the Sherman also had strengths that mattered in prolonged industrial conflict. The tank was mechanically reliable in ways that German designs could not match. A competent crew could replace a damaged engine in the field within hours using hand tools and a crane. Transmissions, which plagued German Panthers throughout the war, rarely failed in Shermans. Parts were standardized across all production runs. A track link from a Sherman built in Detroit would fit a Sherman built in Philadelphia. Road wheels, idler wheels, sprockets, and return rollers were interchangeable. Supply sergeants did not need to track which factory had produced which vehicle. The Sherman could be shipped across oceans in standard cargo holds. It could cross bridges that would collapse under the weight of a Tiger. It could be transported on standard gauge railroad cars throughout Europe. These logistical advantages seem mundane compared to armor thickness and gun caliber, but they determined which tanks actually reached combat and which sat in depots waiting for parts. When the war ended in August 1945, the United States found itself with thousands of surplus Shermans and no strategic use for them. The tank was officially obsolete. American designers were already producing the M26 Pershing heavy tank and planning the M46 and M47 that would replace wartime equipment. Surplus Shermans went to scrapyards, to allies under military assistance programs. Another weapon that had served its purpose and been superseded by superior designs. Instead, something unexpected happened. The Shermans scattered across the globe and stubbornly refused to die. The first major post-war test came in Korea on June 25, 1950. North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel with approximately 250 T-34-85 tanks. These were proven Soviet machines that had crushed the Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front, arguably the best medium tank of World War II. Their crews had trained for months in combined arms tactics. American forces in Japan had virtually no armor capable of stopping them. The occupation army was equipped for peacekeeping, not tank warfare. When North Korean armor rolled south, American infantry found their bazookas bouncing off T-34 frontal armor. Requests for tank support received the response that no tanks were available. The United States Far East Command scrambled to respond. Officers scoured bases across Japan, looking for any operational armor. They found 58 M4A3E8 Shermans scattered in various states of readiness. These were late war models, the best variant produced, featuring the improved horizontal volute suspension system and 76 mm M1 guns that had arrived too late to see significant combat in Europe. The Army created the 8072 Temporary Tank Battalion on July 17th. Within 2 weeks, these hastily assembled crews shipped their tanks to Busan and prepared to meet North Korean armor. The battalion was later redesignated the 89th Tank Battalion on August 7th. American tankers entered combat against T-34s with significant uncertainty about outcomes. The Sherman and T-34 had never met in battle during World War II, when the Soviet Union and United States fought as allies against Germany. Now, American crews would learn whether their aging equipment could stand against Soviet designs. The results surprised many observers. Despite being designed in 1941, the Easy-8 Sherman could hold its own against tanks built 5 years later. The M1 76 mm gun penetrated T-34 armor at normal combat ranges. More importantly, American forces had access to high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition that increased penetration significantly. Korean war Shermans also benefited from superior optics. American gunners could acquire targets faster and had a better chance of scoring first-round hits. The M4A3E8 featured periscope sights that gave crews better situational awareness than T-34 crews enjoyed. In tank combat, the first accurate shot often determines the outcome. A tank that identifies threats faster and hits first usually survives while its opponent burns. American tankers also benefited from superior crew coordination. The Sherman's 5-man crew, with dedicated commander, gunner, loader, driver, and bow gunner, allowed specialization that improved combat effectiveness. The T-34 operated with only 4 crew members, forcing the commander to also serve as loader. This dual responsibility degraded tactical awareness at critical moments. Between July and November 1950, Shermans reportedly destroyed 41 enemy tanks while supporting infantry operations throughout the Busan perimeter. The tank that was supposed to be obsolete 5 years earlier was winning engagements against frontline Soviet equipment. The first confirmed tank versus tank engagement occurred on July 10th near Chunan. American M24 Chaffee light tanks encountered T-34s and were badly outmatched. But when Shermans arrived, the balance shifted. The heavier American tanks could absorb hits that destroyed Chafees and return fire that actually penetrated enemy armor. Throughout the summer and fall of 1950, Shermans provided crucial support during some of the most desperate fighting of the war. At the Busan perimeter, where United Nations forces made their last stand before the Incheon landing, Sherman crews fought continuous engagements against North Korean armor, trying to breach defensive lines. As the war stabilized into positional fighting along the 38th parallel, more Shermans arrived. By the end of 1950, 679 M4A3E8 Shermans had deployed to the Korean peninsula. They served alongside M26 Persings and M46 Pattons, providing infantry support, bunker reduction, and defensive firepower throughout the war. The Korean War demonstrated something important. Obsolete equipment in the hands of well-trained crews with adequate ammunition and proper maintenance could defeat modern opponents under combat conditions. This lesson would repeat itself across multiple continents over the following decades. But Korea was merely a prelude. The true resurrection of the Sherman happened in a place few American designers had ever anticipated. In the newly formed state of Israel, mechanics and engineers performed miracles of improvisation that kept World War II armor fighting well into the jet age and the era of guided missiles. Israel acquired its first Sherman through improvisation that bordered on theft. In May 1948, as British forces withdrew from Palestine, a single M4A2 ended up in the hands of the Haganah, the Jewish paramilitary organization that would become the Israel Defense Forces. British soldiers supposedly destined the tank for destruction, but instead handed it over to Jewish fighters. The tank arrived without its main armament. Resourceful mechanics needed a gun. They mounted a 75mm M3 gun salvaged from another vehicle and named the tank Mia. It fought in the 1948 War of Independence alongside other improvised vehicles that Israeli workshops armed with whatever weapons they could find, including crop field guns purchased from Switzerland. Over the following years, Israeli agents scoured scrapyards across Europe looking for salvageable Shermans. They found more than 30 early production models in Italian junkyards, remnants of the North African campaign. These tanks had been sabotaged for scrapping, their guns destroyed, their engines deliberately damaged. Israeli buyers paid minimal prices for what appeared to be worthless hulks. Israeli workshops refused to accept impossibility as an answer. Mechanics stripped the tanks to bare hulls. They found functional engines where they could, and fabricated replacements where they could not. They mounted whatever guns were available, including field guns and 105mm M4 howitzers intended for infantry support. As more Shermans became available through various channels, both legitimate purchases and creative acquisition, Israel standardized its fleet. By the early 1950s, the country operated several hundred Shermans in various configurations. These vehicles provided the backbone of Israeli armored forces during a period when the new nation faced existential threats from surrounding Arab states. The problem was firepower. The original Sherman guns, whether 75mm or 76mm, could not reliably penetrate the armor on modern Soviet tanks that Arab nations were receiving from Moscow. Egypt, Syria, and other states were acquiring T-34s and eventually T-54s. Israeli military planners knew that in any future conflict, their Shermans would face armor they could not defeat with existing weapons. Something had to change. Israeli officers began examining options for upgrading their tank fleet. Complete replacement was economically impossible. The nation lacked resources to purchase hundreds of modern tanks from Western suppliers, even assuming such suppliers would sell to them. The only practical solution was modifying existing equipment. In 1953, an Israeli military delegation visited France to examine the AMX-13 light tank. The French vehicle weighed only 15 tons, but carried an impressive high-velocity 75mm gun, designated the CN-75-50. This weapon was partly derived from the German 75mm gun that had armed the Panther tank, one of the most effective tank guns of World War II. Israeli officers liked the gun. They did not like the AMX-13's thin armor, which could be penetrated by heavy machine gun fire in some areas, but examining the tank gave them an idea that seemed absurd at first consideration. What if they took the French gun and mounted it in a Sherman hull? The Sherman had adequate armor and proven reliability. The French gun had adequate firepower against modern opponents. Combining them might produce a vehicle capable of fighting contemporary Soviet tanks while using hulls that Israel already possessed in quantity. French engineers agreed to collaborate on the conversion. They developed a modified turret capable of handling the CN-75-50 gun and helped establish conversion procedures that Israeli workshops could implement. In March 1956, Israeli Ordnance Corps facilities began transforming Shermans into something entirely new. The conversion was not simple. The French gun was longer than original Sherman weapons and produced more recoil. Turret modifications were necessary to handle the different ballistics. Internal storage had to be reconfigured for French ammunition. But Israeli mechanics had experience improvising solutions from their years of rebuilding scrapped vehicles. They solved problems that professional engineers might have declared impossible. The first 50 M50 Shermans used the original Continental R975 gasoline engine and vertical volute suspension. Later models received Cummins diesel engines producing 460 horsepower, which improved reliability and reduced fire risk, along with the horizontal volute spring suspension from the Easy 8 variant. In total, approximately 300 Shermans were converted to M50 standard between 1956 and 1964. The M50 saw its first combat during the Suez Crisis in October 1956. Israeli forces invaded the Sinai Peninsula as part of a coordinated operation with Britain and France. They encountered Egyptian armor, including Sherman tanks that Egypt had also acquired and modified. In a strange twist, some Egyptian Shermans carried the FL-10 turret from the AMX-13, the same French tank that had inspired Israel's modifications. Egyptian and Israeli forces both fielded obsolete American hulls upgraded with French armament, fighting each other across desert that neither superpower particularly cared about. Israeli M50s performed well enough in Sinai to validate the modification concept. Crews reported that their upgraded guns could engage Egyptian armor at effective ranges. The vehicles proved reliable under desert conditions that stressed engines and suspensions, but military planners already knew they needed more firepower for the next conflict. Soviet allies were providing Egypt and Syria with T-54 and T-55 tanks. These vehicles mounted 100mm guns in well-sloped turrets on hulls that incorporated lessons from wartime T-34 production. The M50 75mm gun could damage these tanks but required favorable angles and close ranges. Against the newer Soviet armor, Israeli tankers would need every advantage they could find. The answer was a more radical modification. In 1961, Israel began developing the M51, armed with a French 105mm gun. This was the Model F1 cannon designed for France's latest main battle tank, the AMX-30. Mounting such a weapon in a Sherman turret required engineering creativity that bordered on the impossible. Engineers shortened the barrel from 56 calibers to 51 calibers, reducing overall length enough to fit within Sherman turret constraints. They added a massive muzzle brake to help manage recoil forces that the original turret ring was never designed to handle. Ammunition was modified to use smaller cartridges with reduced propellant charges, trading some muzzle velocity for practicality within the cramped fighting compartment. The resulting weapon could fire heat rounds, high-explosive anti-tank ammunition that used shaped charge principles rather than kinetic energy to penetrate armor. Heat effectiveness does not depend on muzzle velocity in the same way conventional armor-piercing rounds do. A slower projectile with a properly designed shaped charge warhead can defeat armor that would stop faster conventional rounds. The M51 entered service in July 1962. 180 Shermans received this conversion. The tank that American factories had built for infantry support in 1942 now carried anti-tank firepower comparable to the most modern Western designs. Its crews could engage T-55s and even T-62s with confidence that their weapons could penetrate enemy armor. The conversion program represented an engineering achievement that professional defense contractors would have considered impossible. Israeli workshops operated without blueprints from American manufacturers, without technical support from French gun designers, without any of the industrial infrastructure that major nations took for granted. They reverse-engineered solutions through trial and error, testing each modification under field conditions before approving it for wider implementation. The resulting vehicles looked strange to observers accustomed to factory-built equipment. The massive muzzle brakes on M51 guns dominated the visual profile. The turret sat higher than original specifications allowed because of internal modifications. External storage racks, additional armor plates, and field-expedient attachments gave each tank a unique appearance that reflected its individual modification history. But these improvised machines worked. They started reliably in desert heat and mountain cold. Their guns fired accurately, despite modifications that changed barrel length and ammunition specifications. Their crews trusted equipment that had been assembled by mechanics working in converted warehouses rather than purpose-built factories. These modifications came not from official military doctrine or international defense contracts. They came from necessity and mechanical creativity. Israeli mechanics worked around limitations that engineers in Detroit had never anticipated. They discovered that obsolete equipment could be transformed into effective weapons when people refused to accept impossibility. On June 5, 1967, thousands of Israeli tankers took their modified Shermans into battle. The Six-Day War would become one of the most decisive military campaigns in modern history. Israel faced approximately 2,500 Arab tanks, including hundreds of modern Soviet designs, with roughly 800 tanks of its own. The Battle of Abu Aghala demonstrated what modified Shermans could accomplish against prepared defenses. Major General Ariel Sharon commanded the Israeli 38th Division with orders to break through Egyptian fortifications, blocking the central route into Sinai. The Egyptians had prepared extensively. Their defensive positions included minefields, anti-tank ditches, fortified infantry positions, and armor in hull-down positions. They fielded 66 T-34-85 tanks and 22 Su-100 tank destroyers, Soviet World War II-era equipment, but still capable of destroying attacking armor. Sharon's forces included approximately 150 tanks. British Centurions provided the heavy punch. French AMX-13s offered speed and maneuverability. M50 and M51 Shermans formed the bulk of the armored strength, their French guns ready to engage Egyptian positions. The attack combined all arms. Artillery fired preparation barrages, while paratroopers landed behind Egyptian lines to neutralize artillery positions. Infantry advanced through sand dunes on the secondary axis, while armor prepared for the main assault. Israeli Super Shermans attacked Egyptian armor from multiple directions. Their French guns proved capable of penetrating Soviet-era armor at combat ranges. Tank crews, who had trained extensively on their modified vehicles, knew exactly what their weapons could accomplish and adjusted tactics accordingly. After 3 hours of fighting on June 6th, Egyptian tank and anti-tank units were destroyed. Israeli forces controlled the road junction at Abu Aghala, and the route into central Sinai lay open throughout the Six-Day War. Modified Shermans fought on all three fronts on the Golan Heights. They engaged Syrian T-34s and T-54s, dug into defensive positions. In the West Bank, they supported infantry clearing Jordanian forces from Jerusalem and surrounding territory. Across the Sinai, they pursued retreating Egyptian columns toward the Suez Canal. The M51's 105mm gun, using heat ammunition, proved capable of penetrating armor on tanks that outweighed and outclassed the Sherman hull by every conventional measure. Israeli crews reported successful engagements against T-54 and T-55 tanks at ranges where their opponents should have held decisive advantages. According to accounts from Israeli tank crews, one notable engagement occurred on the night of June 5th near Jenin. A column of M50s and M51s encountered Jordanian armor in the darkness. Israeli crews used turret-mounted spotlights, a field modification for night operations, to illuminate enemy positions. The Jordanians operated M47 Patton tanks, American vehicles far more modern than the Shermans facing them. Their 90mm guns could destroy Israeli tanks at ranges where Sherman guns struggled to penetrate Patton armor. In the close-range engagements that followed, Israeli crews benefited from extensive training for exactly this kind of night combat. They knew their vehicles, understood their weapons, and reacted faster than opponents caught by surprise. Multiple Jordanian Pattons were destroyed in these engagements, though Israeli Sherman units also suffered significant losses in the fierce fighting around Jenin and the West Bank. The Six-Day War proved that obsolete tanks could defeat modern opponents when crews understood their weapons and commanders employed them intelligently. Superior training, tactical creativity, and familiarity with modified equipment had overcome technical disadvantages that should have been decisive. But the war also revealed limitations that could not be ignored. Israeli tank losses while sustainable given the brief duration of fighting, was significant. Crews who survived recognized that against better trained opponents with the same equipment, outcomes might have been different. The Arab armies had been caught by surprise and fought without coordination. Future conflicts might not offer the same advantages. 6 years later, those limitations became devastatingly clear. On October 6, 1973, Egyptian and Syrian forces launched a coordinated surprise attack during Yom Kippur, one of the holiest days on the Jewish calendar. Israel's confident assumptions about military superiority collapsed within hours. Egyptian forces crossed the Suez Canal using innovative engineering techniques that Soviet advisors had helped develop. They punched through the Barb Line, a series of fortifications that Israeli planners had considered nearly impregnable. Syrian armor poured onto the Golan Heights in numbers that overwhelmed Israeli defensive positions. The attackers brought new weapons and new tactics. Soviet T-62 tanks mounted 150mm smoothbore guns, firing fin-stabilized ammunition that could penetrate Israeli armor at unprecedented ranges. AT-3 Saga anti-tank guided missiles allowed Egyptian infantry to destroy tanks from distances where Israeli crews could not effectively respond. Improved air defenses prevented Israeli aircraft from providing the close support that had been decisive in 1967. Israeli armored units rushed to stop the breakthroughs. Modified Sherman, still serving in reserve formations, joined modern Centurions and Pattons in desperate defensive actions. On the Golan Heights, outnumbered Israeli tankers fought continuous engagements against Syrian divisions that seemed to have unlimited armor reserves. The M51's 105mm gun could theoretically penetrate T-62 armor using heat rounds. Theory and practice diverged under combat conditions. Syrian and Egyptian crews fought with determination and skill that shocked Israeli commanders, who had grown accustomed to easy victories. Anti-tank missiles destroyed Israeli vehicles before their crews could identify firing positions. Modified Shermans suffered heavy casualties. Their armor, never adequate against modern weapons, provided insufficient protection against 115mm guns and shaped charge warheads. Crews who had survived the Six-Day War recognized that their equipment had finally met opponents. It could not overcome through tactical superiority alone. Israel survived the Yom Kippur War through rapid mobilization, American emergency resupply, and tactical adaptation that eventually turned the tide. But the conflict marked the end of the Sherman's frontline service with the Israel Defense Forces. The tank that had fought from Italian scrapyards to the Suez Canal finally passed into reserve and eventual retirement. By the late 1970s, surviving M50s and M51s were being phased out of combat units and transferred to allies or converted for other purposes. The Israeli chapter of Sherman history was closing, but the story continued elsewhere. During the Lebanese Civil War that began in 1975, Israel provided approximately 75 M50 Shermans to Allied Christian militias. These vehicles saw combat in the brutal urban warfare that consumed Beirut. The Palestine Liberation Organization captured at least 2 and used them in the defense of West Beirut during the Israeli invasion of 1982. Shermans that had been manufactured to fight Germans ended up fighting in Lebanese streets. 4 decades later, the tank's adaptability allowed it to serve purposes its designers never contemplated in conflicts they never imagined. Urban combat in Beirut bore no resemblance to the open desert warfare that Israeli doctrine had emphasized. Yet, modified Shermans proved useful even in these unexpected circumstances. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, the Sherman found new homes in South America. In 1978, tensions between Chile and Argentina approached the breaking point over disputed territory in the Beagle Channel. Both nations began mobilizing forces along their 5,150 kilometers shared border. Argentina planned Operation Soberania, an invasion of Chilean territory scheduled for December 22nd. Neither country possessed particularly modern armored forces by global standards. International arms embargoes had limited their access to contemporary equipment, but both operated Sherman tanks that had been modified for continued service. Chile had acquired M50s and M51s from Israel, Some vehicles were further modified with 60mm high-velocity medium support guns, Israeli weapons capable of penetrating T-62 frontal armor at 2,500 meters. Despite their World War II vintage hulls, these Chilean Shermans carried firepower that could threaten any armor in South America. Argentina had taken a different approach. The Argentine army possessed approximately 140 Sherman Fireflies, the British variant armed with 17-pounder guns that had been the most effective Allied tank killer of World War II. In the late 1970s, 120 of these vehicles were converted to the Repetini standard. The Repetini modification replaced the 17-pounder with a French 105mm CN-105-57 gun, similar to the Israeli M51 conversion. The original gasoline engines gave way to Peugeot diesel power plants, producing approximately 450 horsepower. The suspension was upgraded and tracks modified for South American terrain. Both nations had independently arrived at similar solutions: take an obsolete Sherman hull, install a modern 105mm gun, replace the engine with something more reliable, and keep it running because alternatives are unavailable or unaffordable. The prospect of World War II-era tanks fighting each other in 1978 seemed almost surreal. Both Chilean and Argentine tank crews would have operated equipment derived from the same American design, modified by different nations to address the same fundamental limitations. On December 22nd, a storm delayed Argentine naval operations. Pope John Paul II offered to mediate the dispute. Military commanders paused their preparations. The Beagle conflict ended without the armored engagement that both sides had prepared for. Chilean and Argentine Shermans never fired at each other in anger, but both nations kept their modified tanks in service for years afterward. Chile began phasing out its Shermans in 1999, with the retirement process continuing until 2006, as they were replaced by Leopard 1 tanks purchased from the Netherlands and Germany. Argentine Repotenciados served until the mid-1990s. Paraguay received 3 Repotenciados from Argentina in 1988 and kept them operational until 2018. That date deserves emphasis. 2018. A tank designed in 1941, built for a war that ended in 1945, remained in active military service 73 years after its intended operational lifetime. These Paraguayan Shermans served with the Presidential Escort Regiment, one of the oldest continuously active military units in South America. They participated in parades, training exercises, and ceremonial duties until their final retirement. When the last one left service, military historians around the world noted the passing of an era. The Sherman tank, which had been manufactured by the tens of thousands to fight Nazi Germany, had finally completed its operational career in a landlocked South American nation that had never been involved in World War II. The Sherman's longevity reflects something important about military equipment that procurement officers and defense analysts often overlook. The most successful weapons are not necessarily the most advanced. They are the ones that can be maintained, modified, and operated by ordinary people under difficult conditions. During World War II, American factories prioritized standardization and reliability. Every Sherman used the same track links, the same road wheels, the same basic components regardless of which factory produced them. A mechanic who learned to maintain one Sherman could maintain any Sherman anywhere in the world. Parts could be cannibalized from damaged vehicles to repair others. Supply chains did not need to track which subcontractor had produced which component. A replacement transmission from one manufacturer would fit a tank built by another manufacturer 3,000 miles away. These features seemed mundane compared to German engineering sophistication. The Tiger tank had thicker armor and a more powerful gun. The Panther combined revolutionary sloped armor with an excellent 75mm high-velocity cannon. Both outclassed the Sherman in direct armor-on-armor combat by significant margins. But Germany produced approximately 1,300 Tiger I tanks and 6,000 Panthers. The United States produced nearly 50,000 Shermans. When a Tiger broke down, replacing the transmission required specialized equipment, trained mechanics, and parts that might not exist in forward depots. When a Sherman broke down, crews could often fix it themselves with hand tools and determination. After the war, These same characteristics made the Sherman attractive to nations with limited industrial capacity. You did not need sophisticated facilities to maintain a Sherman. You did not need extensive training programs to operate one. You did not need contracts with defense contractors who might refuse to supply spare parts. You could purchase Shermans cheaply from nations that no longer wanted them. You could modify them using whatever weapons and components were available. You could keep them running indefinitely, as long as someone understood basic mechanical principles. Israeli mechanics demonstrated what determined people could accomplish with equipment that official sources had written off as worthless. They did not have access to American supply chains or factory support from Chrysler or General Motors. They improvised solutions using whatever they could acquire from whatever source would sell to them. French guns were modified to fit American turrets that were never designed for them. Diesel engines from commercial truck manufacturers replaced gasoline power plants from aircraft engine producers. Suspension systems were upgraded using components designed for later tank models. The Sherman became a platform for adaptation rather than a fixed design with unchangeable specifications. The Indo-Pakistani War of 1965 provided another demonstration of Sherman adaptability and the importance of factors beyond equipment specifications. Both India and Pakistan operated modified Shermans alongside more modern equipment. The tanks that had helped win World War II were now fighting over territorial disputes on the Indian subcontinent. At the Battle of Asal Utah, Indian forces, including 3 armored regiments, faced Pakistani forces built around the elite 1st Armored Division. The Indians fielded approximately 42 M4 Shermans, 42 AMX-13 light tanks, and 42 British Centurions. The Pakistanis brought approximately 170 M47 and M48 Patton tanks, along with supporting Shermans and Chaffees, totaling over 250 armored vehicles. The Patton's 90mm gun could destroy Shermans at ranges where the older tanks had no effective response. Pakistani armor held advantages in firepower, protection, and mobility. Military analysts would have predicted decisive Pakistani victory. Indian commanders set a trap instead. They flooded sugarcane fields by breaching canal infrastructure, creating swampy ground that would impede armored movement. They positioned their tanks in camouflage defensive positions, arranged in a horseshoe formation. They waited for Pakistani forces to advance into the killing ground, where terrain would neutralize mobility advantages. On September 10, 1965, Pakistani Pattons advanced toward Indian positions through terrain that their commanders believed possible. The swampy ground slowed their movement. Tanks became mired in mud that trapped their tracks. The formation lost cohesion as some vehicles pushed forward, while others struggled with difficult terrain. Indian gunners opened fire from concealed positions at ranges as close as 500 damarism. At those distances, even older guns could penetrate Patton armor from flanking angles. The camouflaged positions made it difficult for Pakistani crews to identify threats and return effective fire. The engagement destroyed approximately 97 Pakistani tanks, mostly Pattons, along with some Shermans and Chaffees that Pakistani forces also operated. Indian losses were minimal by comparison. The battle site became known as Patton Near, Patton City, in Hindi, a monument to the destruction of tanks that should have won decisively against their opponents. Company Quartermaster Havildar Abdul Hamid earned India's highest military decoration for destroying 7 Pakistani tanks using a recoilless rifle mounted on a jeep. He died during the engagement, but delayed the Pakistani advance long enough for armored reinforcements to arrive. The lesson of Asal. It was not that Shermans were superior to Pattons. They clearly were not by any technical measure. The lesson was that terrain, tactics, training and leadership matter more than equipment specifications. A well-led unit with inferior equipment in prepared defensive positions can defeat a poorly led unit with superior equipment advancing through unfavorable ground. This principle appears throughout the Sherman's post-war history. In Korea, American EZ-8s succeeded against T-34s, partly through better ammunition and optics, but also through crew training that emphasized accurate gunnery under stress. In Israel, modified Shermans defeated modern opponents through superior tactics, intimate familiarity with modified equipment, and commanders who understood how to exploit temporary advantages. The tank itself was never exceptional by any conventional measure. American designers deliberately avoided exceptions. They wanted adequate armor, adequate firepower, exceptional reliability, and production capacity limited only by available raw materials and factory floor space. Those priorities produced a weapon that any competent crew could operate and any competent mechanic could maintain. The Sherman succeeded by being ordinary in ways that mattered and adaptable in ways that exceeded every expectation. Consider what Israeli mechanics accomplished with essentially no official support from original manufacturers. Neither Chrysler nor any other American company had involvement in converting Shermans to M50s or M51s. No American engineer designed the mounting systems for French guns in American turrets. Israeli Ordnance Corps personnel figured it out themselves through trial and error and mechanical intuition. They discovered solutions that Detroit never contemplated. They shortened cannon barrels that French designers had built to specific length requirements. They modified turret rings that American engineers had designed for completely different weapons. They replaced entire powertrains with equipment from different nations using different engineering standards. The Sherman became a framework for innovation rather than a finished product with fixed specifications. Its basic soundness, the quality of its steel, the reliability of its components, the accessibility of its mechanical systems allowed modifications that should have been impossible. In each case, Shermans provided capabilities that matched available resources and plausible threats. The tank's fundamental soundness, its reliability, its mechanical accessibility allowed nations to maintain armored forces that would otherwise have been impossible. This distribution also created strange ironies. Shermans that fought alongside each other in World War II later fought against each other in subsequent conflicts. American tanks ended up on both sides of the Indo-Pakistani wars. Vehicles manufactured in Detroit to defeat Germany provided armor for Arab armies seeking to destroy Israel. The same production lines that built tanks for Allied victory created weapons that would threaten Allied interests decades later. These ironies reflect the nature of surplus military equipment. Weapons designed for one war rarely disappear when that war ends. They scatter, find new owners, undergo modifications, and appear in conflicts that their designers never imagined. The Sherman's success in World War II guaranteed its continued presence in subsequent decades. Other tanks from the same era did not achieve comparable longevity. German Tigers and Panthers were too complex and too difficult to maintain. Soviet T-34s served longer, but in more limited geographic distribution. British tanks like the Cromwell and Churchill faded from service within years of the war's end. Only the Sherman achieved truly global post-war distribution and multi-decade service life. The reasons trace back to those original design decisions in 1941. Prioritize production capacity, standardize components, accept adequate performance, build something that ordinary mechanics can maintain under field conditions. These choices seemed conservative, perhaps even unimaginative compared to German engineering ambition or Soviet design innovation. But they produced a weapons system that outlasted its contemporaries by generations. The Sherman was still fighting when tanks that defeated it in individual engagements had long since vanished from military inventories. The Sherman's final military operators have now retired their vehicles. The tank that fought from North Africa to the Philippines during World War II, from Korea to the Sinai during the Cold War, and from the Beagle Channel to the Golan Heights across 7 decades of post-war conflict, has finally left active service. Museums now preserve what battlefields once consumed. You can find Shermans in collections across the world, including modified Israeli variants that document the remarkable engineering accomplishments of mechanics working without factory support or official documentation. These preserved vehicles tell stories that production statistics and specification sheets cannot capture. The Sherman was never the best tank in any conflict where it served. German Tigers and Panthers in World War II, Soviet T-34s and T-54s throughout the Cold War, and contemporary designs from every major producer all exceeded Sherman capabilities by conventional measures of armor, firepower, and mobility. Yet, the Sherman kept fighting while supposedly superior opponents disappeared from service. It adapted while fixed designs became obsolete. It served nations that could not afford better and proved that better was not always necessary. Reliability matters. Adaptability matters. The ability to be maintained by ordinary mechanics working in improvised conditions with limited resources matters. These characteristics receive less attention than armor thickness or gun penetration, but they determine which weapons actually succeed in prolonged conflicts against determined opponents. The mechanics who converted Shermans into Super Shermans understood this instinctively. They worked with what they had, because alternatives did not exist. Their modifications extended the useful life of World War II equipment by decades, allowing nations with limited resources to maintain credible armored forces against better equipped opponents. Israeli tank crews who fought in the Six-Day War took machines that should have been scrapped into battle against modern opponents and emerged victorious. The hulls that had been manufactured in Detroit, shipped to Europe, scrapped in junkyards, salvaged by agents working in secret, and rebuilt multiple times, held together through conditions American designers never anticipated. After the war, tanks returned to storage, awaiting the next conflict that would demand their service. That service came in 1973. The Yom Kippur War consumed equipment at rates that shocked planners. Many modified Shermans that had survived 1967 were destroyed during the desperate fighting. Their crews escaped when they could. The hulls that had crossed continents and survived decades finally met opponents their modifications could not overcome. But other modified Shermans survived. Some went to Chile, where they patrolled borders until the early 2000s. Some went to Lebanese militias, where they fought in civil wars that consumed a generation. Some ended up in museums, where they now teach visitors about mechanical ingenuity and the limits of official planning. The design that American factories created for one war against one enemy fought in conflicts across 4 continents, spanning 7 decades. Production ended in 1945. The last Sherman left military service in 2018. 73 years of operational history from a tank designed for a war that lasted less than 4 years of American involvement. That is how adaptation and innovation actually work in warfare. Not through procurement programs and official requirements documents, but through mechanics and crews who modify existing equipment to meet challenges that original designers never anticipated. The Sherman succeeded not because it was exceptional, but because it was adequate enough to be improved by anyone with mechanical skills and determination. If you found this story of mechanical adaptation and military improvisation as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten chapters of military history with audiences who appreciate these untold stories. Subscribe to stay connected with our continuing coverage of weapons, vehicles, and conflicts that shape the modern world. Each video explores another chapter that official histories often overlook. Leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Our community includes veterans, historians, engineers, mechanics, and military enthusiasts from dozens of countries. Your perspectives and insights make these discussions richer and more meaningful. Thank you for reading. Thank you for remembering the mechanics, engineers, and crews who kept obsolete equipment fighting long past its intended retirement. Their ingenuity deserves recognition even when official histories overlook their contributions. These are the people who actually win wars, not through revolutionary technology but through determination and adaptation when facing impossible circumstances.